Imagine for a moment you've just died. You're looking down at your own lifeless body, and you start laughing. Yes, laughing. In what should be the most terrifying moment of human existence. Sounds impossible? Well, that's exactly what happened to an 80-year-old woman during a documented regression therapy session. And what I've come to understand from her experience will completely shatter everything you believe about the end of life. This is the other side, and what you're about to discover in the next minutes could transform your fear of death forever and reveal a truth about human consciousness that will leave you absolutely amazed. Because what she saw wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something extraordinary. And what I've pieced together from her testimony has changed my entire understanding of what it means to be human. This isn't just another near-death experience story. This is a complete revelation about the nature of consciousness, the purpose of suffering, and why everything we've been taught about death might be completely backwards. So buckle up, because we're about to dive into one of the most profound cases ever documented, and by the end of this video, you'll never look at life, death, or your own identity the same way again. Before I reveal what made this woman laugh at her own death, I need to give you the context of this incredible case, and more importantly, why it matters so much. For over 4 decades, regression therapists have documented thousands of cases where people, under deep hypnosis, have relived their death experiences from past lives. But this particular case stands out because of one shocking detail: the complete transformation that happened in a split second. Now, I want to be completely transparent with you. This case comes from documented regression therapy sessions, and I'm sharing my interpretation and understanding of what this means for all of us. This isn't medical advice. It's a philosophical and spiritual exploration of consciousness based on documented testimony. What fascinates me about this case is how it challenges every assumption we have about aging, suffering, and death. This 80-year-old woman was reliving her final moments. She had lived a long life, but her body was worn out, tired, moving slowly. She was moaning in discomfort, saying there wasn't much joy anymore. She was exhausted. And here's what strikes me as profound. This wasn't just physical tiredness. This was the accumulated weight of 8 decades of human experience. Think about that for a moment. 80 years of joys and sorrows, victories and defeats, love and loss, hope and disappointment. 80 years of carrying the human condition. The therapist, recognizing her distress, moved her forward in time to the moment after death had occurred. And what happened next defied everything we think we know about dying. Her entire body jerked on the bed, and she suddenly smiled. Her voice became full of life, nothing like the weary tones from just moments before. And then, she started making sounds of pure delight. She was laughing at what she saw. But what I've come to understand from studying this case goes far beyond just a death experience. It's a window into the very nature of what we are and what we're doing here on Earth. So, what exactly did she see that made her laugh? And more importantly, what can I understand from her reaction? When asked if she could see her body, her response was immediate and shocking. "Oh, that old thing? It's down there. Oh, I had no idea I looked so bad. I was so wrinkled and shriveled. I feel too good to be that shriveled." It was all worn out. She was making sounds of absolute delight. She said, Oh, I'm so glad I'm here." Now, here's what I find absolutely fascinating about this response. Think about this for a moment. She's looking at her own dead body, the body she had lived in for 80 years, and she's disgusted by it. She calls it that old thing, like it's a piece of worn-out clothing she's finally happy to take off. But what I understand from this reaction is something that completely revolutionizes how we think about identity. She wasn't mourning the loss of her body. She was celebrating her freedom from it. This tells me that what we think of as ourselves, our physical appearance, our age, our limitations, these aren't actually us at all. They're just temporary costumes we're wearing. And here's what really blows my mind. The contrast between how she felt in the body versus how she felt out of the body was so dramatic that she couldn't stop expressing her joy. Just moments before, she was tired, in pain, moving slowly, with no joy. But the instant she left that body, "I feel free, I'm light," she exclaimed. What I understand from this is that every limitation we experience, every ache, every pain, every moment of exhaustion, these aren't inherent to who we are. They're just experiences we're having while wearing these physical bodies. The therapist could hardly keep from laughing herself because the woman's expression and tone of voice was such a complete contrast to what had just happened. But what I've come to realize is that her laughter wasn't random or inappropriate. It was the natural response of someone who had just realized they'd been taking a costume drama way too seriously. Imagine spending your whole life thinking you were the character you were playing in a movie, only to suddenly remember you're actually the actor. Wouldn't you laugh at how seriously you'd been taking the role? That's what I believe happened to this woman, and it's just the beginning of what I've come to understand from her experience. When asked where she was, her answer revealed something that has completely changed how I think about consciousness forever. "I'm in the light and ooh, it feels good. I feel intelligent. I feel peace. I feel calm. I don't need anything." Now let me break down what I understand from this statement because it's absolutely revolutionary. First, she said, "I feel intelligent." Not just peaceful, not just free from pain, but more intelligent than she had ever felt in her physical body. What I understand from this is that our physical bodies aren't just limiting our movement or causing us pain, they're actually limiting our intelligence, our awareness, our very consciousness. Think about this. How many times have you had the experience of knowing something but not being able to articulate it, or feeling like you understand something on a deep level, but your mind can't quite grasp it? Or having moments of clarity that seem to come from somewhere beyond your normal thinking? What I believe this woman experienced was consciousness without the filter of the physical brain. Pure awareness without the limitations of neural pathways, without the fog of physical fatigue, without the static of bodily sensations. And here's what really fascinates me. She said, "I don't need anything." In our physical existence, we're constantly driven by needs: food, water, shelter, love, recognition, security. Our entire lives are organized around meeting these needs. But what I understand from her statement is that these needs aren't actually ours. They belong to the body-mind system we're operating through. Our true nature, our consciousness itself, is completely self-sufficient. When asked what she was going to do now, she said, "They tell me I've got to go and rest. Oh, I hate to rest when I've got so much to do." Even in this state of perfect peace and expanded consciousness, she was eager to grow and learn. She didn't want to be cramped again, referring to being back in a physical body. What I understand from this is profound. What we call life in a physical body might actually be a very limited, cramped version of our true existence. It's like we're infinite beings who have temporarily squeezed ourselves into these tiny physical forms for some specific purpose. And when we remember our true nature, the contrast is so dramatic that we can't help but laugh. But here's what I find most intriguing. She was eager to continue growing and learning, even in her expanded state. This tells me that consciousness itself is inherently creative, expansive, and evolutionary. We're not here to reach some final destination. We're here to continuously expand and evolve. And the reason she was laughing? I believe she had just realized how unnecessarily she had been limiting herself. Here's what I've come to understand from her experience that will amaze you. Death isn't what happens to us, it's what happens for us. Her laughter wasn't cruel or dismissive. It was the laughter of someone who suddenly understands a cosmic joke. She had spent 80 years thinking that wrinkled, tired, painful body was her. But what I understand from her reaction is that it wasn't her at all. It was just something she was wearing. Think about it. When you take off uncomfortable shoes after a long day, don't you feel relief? Don't you sometimes laugh at how much better you feel? That's exactly what I believe happened to her, but on a consciousness level. She took off her 80-year-old body like taking off uncomfortable shoes, and the relief was so immense that she couldn't help but laugh. But here's what I find most important. She said, "I feel too good to be that shriveled." And what I understand from this is that her true self, her consciousness, her soul, was never old, never tired, never in pain. Those were just experiences the body was having. The body was all worn out, but she was perfect, light, free, and more intelligent than ever. This completely flips my understanding of aging, suffering, and death. What if none of those things are actually happening to the real you? What I've come to realize is that we've been looking at this whole thing backwards. We think we're bodies that somehow developed consciousness. But what if we're consciousness that temporarily inhabits bodies? We think aging and death are tragedies that happen to us. But what if they're just natural transitions, like graduating from one grade to the next? We think suffering is meaningless and should be avoided at all costs. But what if it's precisely the contrast we need to appreciate our true nature? What I understand from this woman's experience is that every moment of limitation, every experience of pain, every feeling of being cramped in our physical existence is actually serving a purpose we can't see from our limited perspective. But when we step back, when we die to our identification with the physical experience, suddenly the whole thing makes perfect sense. And the natural response is laughter. Not because suffering is funny, but because we realize how seriously we were taking something that was always temporary, always just a role we were playing. What I believe she discovered is that consciousness is like an actor who has become so immersed in playing a character that they forgot they were acting. And death is like the moment the director calls cut, and you suddenly remember who you really are. The relief, the joy, the laughter. It's the natural response of remembering your true identity after being lost in a role for so long. The implications of what I've come to understand from this case are absolutely staggering, and they touch every aspect of how we live our daily lives. First, what I understand is that you are not your body. You are the consciousness that inhabits the body, and that consciousness is eternal, perfect, and unlimited. But let me go deeper into what this means practically. If your consciousness temporarily wearing a body, then every physical limitation you experience, every ache, every pain, every sign of aging, these aren't happening to the real you. They're happening to your temporary vehicle. Think about this. When your car breaks down, you don't think you are broken. You understand that your transportation method needs repair or replacement. What I've come to understand from this woman's experience is that our relationship with our bodies should be similar. Second, what we call aging and death are just changes happening to our temporary vehicle, not to our true self. But here's where this gets really interesting. If our consciousness is eternal and unlimited, why would we choose to experience limitation? Why would we voluntarily cramp ourselves into these physical forms? What I understand from studying this case is that consciousness is inherently creative and expansive. It wants to experience every possible perspective, every possible contrast, every possible way of being. You can't truly appreciate light without experiencing darkness. You can't fully understand freedom without experiencing limitation. You can't deeply know love without experiencing separation. So what I believe is happening is that consciousness, our true self, deliberately chooses to experience limitation for the sake of expansion and growth. Third, the suffering we experience in life, physical pain, emotional distress, mental limitations, what I understand is that these are not happening to the real you. They're happening to the body-mind system you're currently using. But here's where this gets practical for your daily life. If this woman could feel such immediate relief and joy the moment she separated from her physical experience, what does that tell us about our current relationship with suffering? How much of the pain, stress, and limitation you feel right now is actually necessary? How much of it comes from over-identifying with your physical experience instead of recognizing your true nature as consciousness? What I've come to understand is that we don't have to wait until we die to access this perspective. We can begin to identify less with our temporary physical experience and more with our eternal consciousness right now. She didn't just discover something about death. What I understand is that she discovered something about life. She realized that the peace, intelligence, and freedom she felt in the light was her natural state. The body had been masking it, not creating it. This means that everything you're seeking, peace, joy, freedom, intelligence, love, you already are. You're just temporarily experiencing the contrast of not having access to it through your physical limitations. And what I find most beautiful about this understanding is that it makes every moment of struggle meaningful. You're not suffering randomly or pointlessly. Your consciousness exploring what it's like to temporarily forget your true nature, so that you can have the joy of remembering. But perhaps the most profound implication of what I've come to understand is this. If death is actually liberation, then what is life? Based on her experience, what I understand is that physical life appears to be a temporary limitation we take on for the purpose of growth and learning. She mentioned wanting to grow and learn even in her expanded state. This suggests to me that we don't come into physical bodies to suffer randomly. We come here to experience specific lessons that can only be learned through the contrast of limitation. Think about it. If you're naturally unlimited consciousness, how do you learn about patience? You experience limitation. How do you learn about compassion? You experience suffering. How do you learn about love? You experience separation. What I understand from her laughter is that it wasn't just about being free from an old body. It was the laughter of someone who suddenly understood the purpose of the whole experience. And here's what this means for you right now. And this is where everything I've understood from this case becomes practical. Every challenge you're facing, every limitation you're experiencing, every moment of suffering. What I've come to understand is that these aren't punishments or accidents. They're precisely the experiences your consciousness chose to have for its own expansion. Now, I know that might be hard to accept, especially if you're going through something difficult right now. But let me explain what I mean. The woman said she felt intelligent in the light. What I understand from this is that from the perspective of expanded consciousness, we can see the perfection and purpose in experiences that seem random or cruel from our limited physical perspective. It's like being an actor who's so immersed in playing a tragic character that you forget you chose the role. From inside the character, the tragedy seems meaningless and unfair. But from the perspective of the actor, you understand that you chose this role because it would stretch your abilities and deepen your understanding of the human experience. What I've come to understand is that consciousness works the same way. We choose challenging experiences not because we're masochistic, but because they offer opportunities for growth that wouldn't be available any other way. And here's the beautiful part. You have access to that expanded perspective right now. You don't have to wait until you die to understand the purpose and perfection of your current experience. What I understand from this woman's case is that the intelligence she felt in the light is actually your natural state. It's who you are when you're not identified with your temporary physical limitations. You can access that intelligence through meditation, through moments of deep reflection, through any practice that helps you step back from your immediate physical experience and connect with your deeper nature. And when you do, what I believe you'll discover is the same thing this woman discovered, that everything you're experiencing, even the difficult parts, is perfectly designed for your growth and expansion. The laughter isn't because suffering is funny. The laughter is because you realize that you're so much bigger than anything that could ever happen to your temporary physical form. Your consciousness itself, playing the role of a human being. And when you remember that, every experience becomes meaningful, every challenge becomes an opportunity, and every limitation becomes a gift that helps you appreciate your unlimited nature. So what have I come to understand from this woman's experience that will amaze you? I've come to understand that everything we fear about death is actually everything we should celebrate about it. I've come to understand that our true nature is so magnificent, so free, so intelligent, that when we finally remember who we really are, we can't help but laugh at how seriously we took our temporary limitations. I've come to understand that the body isn't our prison, it's our classroom. And when class is over, we get to go home to our natural state of unlimited consciousness. But most importantly, what I've come to understand is that this freedom, this peace, this expanded intelligence, it's not something we have to wait for. It's what we are right now, underneath all the physical and mental noise. Her laughter was the sound of remembering, and you can access that remembering right now. Here's what I want you to try. The next time you're struggling with physical pain, emotional distress, or mental limitation, remember this woman's laughter. Remember that what I've come to understand is that the real you, the consciousness reading these words right now, is untouchable, unlimited, and eternal. You're not a body having a spiritual experience. What I understand from this case is that you're a spiritual being having a temporary physical experience, and when you truly get that, you might just find yourself laughing too. But here's what I find most practical about this understanding. It doesn't require you to believe anything. It just requires you to experiment with a different perspective. What if, just for today, you tried identifying less with your physical experience and more with the consciousness that's aware of that experience? What if you treated your body like a vehicle you're driving rather than something you are? What if you approached your challenges as opportunities for growth rather than problems to be solved? What I've come to understand from studying this case is that even a small shift in perspective can create profound changes in how you experience life. You don't have to wait until you die to feel free, intelligent, and unlimited. You can begin to access those qualities right now by remembering what this woman remembered. You are consciousness itself, temporarily playing the role of a human being. And what I find most beautiful about this understanding is that it makes everything meaningful. Your struggles aren't random, they're chosen. Your limitations aren't permanent, they're temporary. Your suffering isn't pointless, it's purposeful. You're here to expand, to grow, to experience every possible aspect of consciousness. And when your time in this particular body is complete, what I understand is that you'll look back and laugh, not because it was funny, but because you'll finally see the perfection in the whole experience. Now I want to hear from you. Has what I've shared about this case changed how you think about death, about your current challenges, about your own identity? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this understanding has shifted something in you, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the most profound truths are also the most simple. Subscribe for more explorations of consciousness, death, and the true nature of reality. Because if this case has taught me anything, it's that everything we think we know about life and death might just be the beginning of a much bigger, much more amazing story. Until next time, remember what I've come to understand. You are so much more than you think you are, and that's something worth laughing about.